This is Chef Katz, coming to you live from space. Today, we're going to be smoking my eyes out with this very hot pan. That's not true, but the pan is very hot because we are getting ready to make some Middle Eastern spaghetti squash ground turkey. Great tip is just to have things like this of ground turkey on hand. They don't come in this fashion. You have to buy them in packages, but then you can put it into separate containers, portion sized out, have it available for when you want it. I'm going to use 3 containers, and I'm going to be making this for about 8 people. Unlike the chicken when we did it, the turkey doesn't release too much moisture after it's defrosted, so you don't have to worry about draining out in the liquid. There might be a little bit of liquid in there, but we're not going to mind that little bit. It's not going to cool the pans down significantly enough. That is something we have to worry about. As always, spray our pans nice and smoking hot. You might see a little bit of residue in there. That's because I was making something else, and right before it, the item that we used left a lot of fond. Fond, as we talked about before, is just flavor. It's the flavor that's left over. Now, we don't want that fond to burn in there, but we can have it still in the pan when we make the next thing, add some additional flavor. You can use the turkey that you put in to actually kind of clean the fond. Now, you can see this is a little bit challenging to break up. We're going to throw another one into our other pan, which we got to spray. And drop that right in. What you might want to do is use a little bit more strong spatula to break that up, especially if it's still slightly frozen, which it looks like this is. Better to have it defrosted completely, but it's a little late for that. And this one actually is perfect. If it really doesn't want to cooperate, heat it up. Okay. And we've got one more container here. Because this one's a little bit more frozen, I'm going to just put a little bit more extra into this one. So dispensing them, fairly evenly. And what we want to do now is get a nice browning all along the outside of the turkey, as much of it as possible, getting it even consistency and even size through all the chunks. So you don't want to have too many big chunks and small chunks. You want to have them more or less all be about the same size. And I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of salt. And a little bit of black pepper. Now we see that in pretty much everything. Those are the basics for our flavors. But we're going to be adding some very unique flavors in, some different flavors in just a minute here. Cooperate. And as you can see, we start off with really hot pans, but very quickly, those pans have cooled right down. So you want to respect that. We are going to be adding some additional ingredients, but you don't want to turn your pans cold by putting in too much stuff. You want to let that heat rebuild, let the metal do its job, conducing heat, but the only way to do that is by letting them sit for a period of time and obviously warming up the ingredients that are in the pan. And we're going to just let those sit for a few minutes. Put a little bit of olive oil in there. The other thing about oil that is almost taken for granted is that oil also conduces heat. So heat is transferred to the oil, and the oil then is cooking whatever you have in the pan, in this case turkey. So think about French fries. French fries never touch any metal surface. They never touch any hard surface. They are only going into oil. So all the heat is conduced through the oil. And on a very basic biochemical level, the different ways of heat application affect the actual outcome of the product, of what you're cooking. So cooking something in a metal pan versus cooking something in a ceramic pan, versus cooking something dry, versus cooking something in a liquid, versus cooking something in oil. All of those things are going to have different effects on the outcome. All of them are going to have different effects on the properties of the food. Oil, one of the things that it does is it causes crispiness. Crispiness is something that a lot of us like in our food. We like that crunch. We like a little bit of different texture within the same product, within the same, so you have kind of like a crispy, if you think about like a good hash brown or a good French fry, nice and crispy on the outside, but still soft on the inside. When it starts to get too hard, then it's, you know, maybe harder, a little bit crispier on the outside, but it's not really any different texture on the inside. We don't have that contrast in textures, just like if we think about contrast in flavor. Very similar. Contrast is one of the things that allows us to enjoy the different elements. And that's why we intentionally are always trying to create contrast. Not always, a lot of it. Our turkey now is pretty nice and dry. You can see that it's well cooked through. And when I say dry, I don't mean we want to dry it out, but more that you could see before where there was a lot of liquid. We've cooked it down so there's not too much residual liquid in it. The pieces are starting to brown. We've got a pretty nice evenly sized portion pieces. And I'm going to add my onions in, and I'm going to brown those up a little bit with the turkey. And if you're thinking, Chef Kaz, how much do I know to put in? Think about a ratio, right? You think about like if you got a sandwich, or you think about you got a hamburger, or something like that. What would be your desired ratio of onion to meat? Or what would be your desired ratio of cooked onion to meat? Usually if we have raw onion on a sandwich or a hamburger, we can't take as much as we could if we had some caramelized onions. Think also that when you cook the onions, they're going to cook down. So even though when I put these in, it looked like a lot of product, as I cook it, the onions are going to reduce in size and almost down to nothing. A lot of that moisture is going to be released, and a lot of that moisture is going to go directly into the turkey, which is why I cook it with the turkey. But don't base it on how it looks at first. Base it on how much it's going to cook down to. As we've seen with other products such as eggplant and mushrooms that we've used in other dishes, those products will cook down to almost nothing, which all it leaves is concentrated flavor. As you cook something down, the flavor is left. The moisture leaves, some of the flesh condenses, and all that's left is flavor. And that's what we're aiming for here. Once we start noticing pretty much all the moisture leaving, we don't want to overcook the turkey, we don't want to dry it out, even though we are going to be slow cooking it with liquid, which will obviously bring the moisture back in. But we want to retain some of the natural moisture. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the heat slightly, down to about a medium heat from high. We're going to put a little bit more olive oil in. And again, knowing how much, you want to just think, how much do I need to coat what's already in the pan? Okay? You're going to move everything around, make sure it all gets coated with the oil that you just put in. Move it all around. And then we're going to put in our spices. And today we're going to go very simple. We're going to be using some curry powder and some ground cumin. Very traditional. We're also going to use a little bit of chili powder and some red pepper flakes. Need the chili powder again. So I'm going to sprinkle over here. And I don't want to say be careful, just know your flavors. When you're using cumin and curry powder, these can be very intense ingredients. What you're going to see in a couple minutes is that we're going to create some contrast with them also. So these are very savory, very pungent, aromatic ingredients. One of the ways to kind of balance that out is actually with sweet. So as I put these, I'm going to turn my heat all the way down to low now. And as I put the different components in, I'm going to mix it around so that we get all of that moisture and all the steam that is below the turkey mixed in, and all of that cumin really kind of almost becomes like a soupy consistency with the turkey. And if I see any big chunks, again, breaking those up, moving everything around, make sure it's spread out evenly. And I'm going to be adding a couple more things, so I'm not worried about making it perfect just yet. Now I'm going to add in my curry powder. You know, another layer of seasoning. And curry powder does have cumin, but I really like the cumin flavor. And the cumin is just a very distinctive taste. A lot of people will say they don't like it. You gotta come to Chef Kaz's kitchen. You gotta come to Chef Kaz's kitchen. You gotta try mine. Cooking in space, we need these things, you know, we need variety on our palate. A lot of people will say they don't like something before they've even had it, or when they've had it once. And I'm not saying that you will like it, but you might be surprised. Different things, when made differently, will have different results. Another thing to consider is think about a class. When you go to a class taught by a great teacher, a great professor, someone who's very interesting, very engaging, very intriguing, it's very different than if it's taught by someone who's very boring and monotone, like Ferris Bueller, Ben, help me, someone from the universe.
Stein.
Ben Stein. Same time. Yeah, you know, it's like when you hear that dry, monotone voice, it doesn't excite you, it doesn't interest you. It's not going to do anything for you. Just sprinkling in some carrot syrup. It's going to be a nice contrast in flavor. It's also just going to absorb some of the moisture, some flavorings that we've already added in. And you can see those onions are really cooked down now. And on top of that, I'm going to put in some already cooked spaghetti squash. So what we did was we roasted the spaghetti squash whole at 325 degrees until it was nice and brown on the outside of the shell. And once we did that, we let it cool and we scraped out the inside, taking out the seeds, taking out all the seeds, scraping out the flesh, and that's how we have our spaghetti squash here. Take that, a couple big portions, spatula-fuls of our spaghetti squash. Dump that right on top. And the other thing that's going to do is it's going to add just another different flavor profile. It's going to add it. You're not even going to almost notice that it's in there. And it does have a nice little sweet to it, subtle, and we're going to add something a little bit even more sweet in just a second. And then finally, I'm going to put in one of Chef Kaz's signature and favorite ingredients, which are raisins. Dried fruit is very undervalued. Now it's hard to find dried fruit other than raisins that are unsweetened. You might be able to find dried cranberries that are unsweetened, but it's very hard to find dried blueberries, and even things like strawberries or mango or pineapple. Usually they're sweetened. I don't love that artificial sugar. It just doesn't taste right. This fruit is already sweet. I don't need my fruit to be sweetened. But what this is going to do, the raisins, as we put them in, is it's going to add a really nice little pop, a little just bang for your buck in the dish. And it's going to have a nice contrast in the flavor, the texture, and also it's going to absorb. We're going to put some liquid into this in just a second, and it's going to pick up some of that liquid and swell up. The raisins in the final dish will not be all shriveled up. They're actually going to absorb some of the liquid, which is a pretty cool thing about dried fruit, is it will reabsorb any liquid that you sit it in. For those of you at home who might like to have, a party, sit some raisins in vodka or rum, see how that comes out. I would not suggest eating too many of them at once unless you want to have a really, really fun party. So we're going to pull these off the heat. We're going to once again get a sautoir because we're going to cook these. We're going to slow cook these. Scooping in all the product carefully into the pan. Heavy. If you're using these big 14-inch pans, I will just warn you, they do get heavy. And that sautoir is very full. I don't want to make it any more full than that, but that'll have to do for now. Only other thing we're going to do to it is we're going to add a little bit more salt. It's probably going to need it. We haven't put a lot of salt in. And I'm actually going to use some coarse salt, which is really nice because it will break up slowly over time. Just be careful because it's a lot more potent than your regular refined salt. A little bit more red pepper flakes. And I think I'm going to put in a little bit more chili powder as well. We'll taste it a little bit later to see how the amounts are with the cumin, the curry powder. We've got some liquid here, and we are going to pour that right in. That's just water. I'm actually going to put a little bit more. So it's about 2/3 of the way up the pan. I'm going to cover this, and once again, get it over heat. Bring up to a boil, down to a simmer. We're now going to plate our Middle Eastern turkey. First, for a base, and remember, you want to pick your servingware deliberately. You want to have your end vision of what your plate is going to look like in mind before you start plating. Don't get halfway through your plating and then think, oh wait, how do I want this to look? And it's not just where you put the components on the plate, it's the plate itself. Deliberately pick your plate thinking you want to have a certain outcome. I'm going to make this plate look a certain way and visualize what that's going to look like. So we're using a deep, kind of square, round bowl, a very interesting shape plate here. And so I want to keep in mind that shape for when I put in my components. So first, I'm going to start with it's a lightly braised cabbage. Lightly braised cabbage with just some orange, red, and yellow peppers. And I'm going to put that at the bottom of my bowl here as kind of like a base, a really like nice light color. And that you're going to notice with this dish, there's a lot of very light earth spring colors. And then I'm going to put on some quinoa. And again, thinking about height, we're going to keep a nice height to this. And there's going to be a couple more layers on top of that, so I'm not too worried about having it look too clean just yet. I don't want it to go too far along the edges, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Next, I'm going to take some roasted butternut squash, and this is just butternut squash that we roasted at 325 degrees in the whole squash. Open it up, took out the seeds, and then took out the flesh. We're just going to put that right in the middle there. And that's going to be a really nice sweet flavor, which is going to go well with our turkey. And it's also going to provide another contrast because we've already got the sweet with the raisins, but now we're going to have like a different kind of sweet, and the texture of that squash is going to be so nice. It's like a nice like paste. It's like a squash paste almost. And that is mashed up with a little bit of olive oil, salt, and black pepper. So I'm going to take my turkey now, sit that right in the center, and again, I want to get another tool to help you really guide on the place where you want it to be. And all the time we're building a tower. And I really like the different, really light colors. And that is our Middle Eastern braised